The wind across the Eurasian steppe 50,000 years ago did not just carry the scent of snow. It carried the weight of a dying era. In the mouth of a limestone cavern, a fire flickers against the encroaching frost. Around it sit a group of people, broad-shouldered, deep-chested, with brow ridges carved by the harsh reality of the Ice Age. These are the Neanderthals. For 300,000 years, they have been the undisputed masters of this frozen frontier. They have outlasted shifting glaciers, hunted mammoths with nothing but hand-sharpened spears, and buried their kin with a tenderness that suggests a profound understanding of life and loss. But there is a silence creeping into their world, one that has nothing to do with the winter. It is a biological silence. For over a century, the story we told ourselves about their end was one of violence and conquest. We imagined our own ancestors, Homo sapiens, arriving like a storm to sweep these primitive cousins into the dustbin of history. We looked for evidence of war, for signs of a grand struggle between two species of humans. However, as we peered deeper into the very fabric of their remains, the ancient DNA locked within teeth and bone fragments, a much more haunting truth emerges. The Neanderthals weren't defeated in a great war. They were fading long before the first modern human ever set foot in their territory. Their end was not a sudden catastrophe, but a slow, mathematical inevitability written into their own genetic code. They weren't pushed off a cliff. They had simply run out of the one thing evolution cannot replace: each other. To truly appreciate the tragedy of their disappearance, we have to discard the myth of the clumsy caveman. The Neanderthals were a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. While our ancestors were still adapting to the tropical heat of Africa, the Neanderthals were conquering environments that would be lethal to us today. They developed shorter, stockier limbs to conserve heat and massive nasal passages to warm the frigid air before it reached their lungs. Their intelligence was not a lesser version of ours. It was specialized for a different world. They were the first to use chemical adhesives, distilling birch tar to mount stone points to wooden shafts. They understood the medicinal properties of plants, using chamomile and yarrow to treat ailments. They were people of the forest and the tundra, deeply attuned to the rhythms of a continent that was constantly trying to freeze them out. For 300,000 years, this strategy worked. They were the apex. But there was a hidden flaw in their social structure, a strategy that had served them well during the lean times of the Ice Age, but would eventually become their undoing. They lived in islands, small, isolated family groups scattered across a vast, unforgiving landscape. While this kept them from exhausting local resources, it created a demographic fragility that left them vulnerable to the slightest tremor in the path of history. The breakthrough that changed everything didn't come from a dramatic excavation of a battlefield. It came from the microscopic analysis of a tooth and a shard of bone from caves in the Altai Mountains. When scientists sequenced the Neanderthal genome with high precision, they found something unsettling. Long stretches of identical DNA on both copies of the same chromosome. In the world of genetics, this is known as runs of homozygosity. It is the unmistakable signature of a population that has been breeding within a very small, very closed circle for a very long time. It wasn't just happening in one cave. This signal was detected in Croatia, in Belgium, and in the Caucasus. This tells us that Neanderthal populations were not expanding or branching outward like a healthy, growing species. They were folding inward. While the human population in Africa was a roaring river of genetic diversity, the Neanderthals were a series of disconnected, stagnant ponds. By the time we can see their genetic record clearly, their effective population, the number of individuals actually contributing to the next generation, was shockingly low. On an entire continent, there might have been fewer than 5,000 breeding Neanderthals at any given time. A single modern football stadium could have held the entire future of their species. When a population is that small, the laws of probability become lethal. In a large group, a bad mutation or a streak of bad luck is diluted by the sheer number of people. If one family fails to have children, 10 others will. But in the world of the Neanderthal, where a group might consist of only 20 individuals, every life is a load-bearing pillar. If a harsh winter kills the most experienced hunters, the group starves. If an illness moves through a small tribe, it doesn't just kill individuals, it wipes out an entire branch of the species' knowledge. This is genetic drift, the slow, random loss of genetic variants. Over millennia, the Neanderthals were losing their biological insurance. Harmful mutations weren't being filtered out, they were being baked into the population because there was no one else to mate with. They were becoming less fertile, less resilient, and more susceptible to disease. Not because they were unfit, but because they were alone. Then, the clock moved. Between 60,000 and 45,000 years ago, Homo sapiens began to pour out of Africa and into the Neanderthal heartland. We didn't bring better muscles. In fact, a Neanderthal could likely overpower a modern human with ease. What we brought was something the Neanderthals lacked: a massive, interconnected social network. Modern humans moved along coastlines and river systems, but we didn't stay in our valleys. We traded shells from the coast for flint from the mountains. We moved mates between tribes hundreds of kilometers apart. We were a global web of information and genes. When we encountered the Neanderthals, the exchange was immediate. We know this because that history is still written in our own blood. Most people of non-African descent carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA today. But for the Neanderthals, the arrival of modern humans wasn't a rescue. It was a final, unintended pressure. We didn't have to hunt them down. We simply occupied the same spaces, hunted the same game, and did so with the resilience of a population that had a backup over the next hill. As we expanded, the already fragmented Neanderthal groups were pushed further into the margins, into the most isolated caves and the most rugged mountains. The tragedy of this isolation is best seen in the physical evidence left behind in the cold earth. At Shagaraya Cave in Siberia, researchers uncovered a snapshot of a family in decline. They found the remains of a father and his teenage daughter, buried in the same layer of soil. When their DNA was sequenced, it revealed they were part of a community so small and inbred that their genetic diversity was lower than that of the most endangered species on Earth today. They were living on the absolute edge of existence, a father and child huddling together in a world that was rapidly forgetting them. In another site, the Mesmyskaya Cave in the Caucasus, the DNA of individuals separated by thousands of years showed almost no change. In a healthy population, 5,000 years of time should bring in a flood of new genetic material from neighboring groups. But for these people, nothing changed. No one new ever arrived. No fresh blood ever entered the valley. They were a lineage trapped in a loop, waiting for a spark that would never come. These aren't just data points. They are the stories of people who lived, breathed, and loved, only to find themselves at the end of a very long and lonely road. By 40,000 years ago, the Neanderthals had contracted to a handful of final refuges, places like the Rock of Gibraltar or the deep valleys of the Iberian Peninsula. The genetic evidence from these last survivors shows them to be even more isolated than their ancestors. They were the victims of a biological mathematics they could not escape. The end didn't require a villain. It didn't require a plague or a massacre. It was a conclusion that the genetic record had been pointing toward for tens of thousands of years. They didn't fail in the way we usually think of failure. They had survived everything the Ice Age could throw at them: shifting poles, vanishing forests, and giant predators. But in the end, they ran out of the one thing that evolution cannot replace on short notice: a large enough community to buffer the blows of chance. They faded, one small group at a time, one fire going cold at a time. The silence grew until there was no one left to answer the call of a distant tribe. The story of the Neanderthal is not a story of their weakness, but a testament to the importance of our connection. They were a sophisticated, intelligent, and deeply human species. Their disappearance is a somber reminder that in the long journey of evolution, individual strength and intelligence are not enough. The true survival strategy of Homo sapiens was not our spears or our larger brains, but our ability to reach out to one another across the horizon. We survived because we were a network. They vanished because they were a series of islands. Today, we carry their legacy in our own DNA. They gave us genes that helped our ancestors survive new diseases and adapt to colder climates. They are not a failed experiment. They are a part of us. The lesson they leave behind is clear. Isolation is a death sentence, but connection is life. We are at our most vulnerable when we close ourselves off, and at our most resilient when we realize that our survival depends entirely on our ability to sustain one another. The Neanderthals did not lose to us. They lost to the silence of their own isolation. It is up to us to ensure that we never let that silence return.